Cloudcast Media presents from the massive studios in Raleigh, North Carolina. This is the Cloudcast with Aaron Delp and Brian Gracely, bringing you the best of cloud computing from around the world.
Good morning, good evening, wherever you are, and welcome back to the Cloudcast. We are coming to you live from the massive Cloudcast studios here in Raleigh, North Carolina. Aaron, how are you doing, man? We are now back to work, back into January. How you been, man?
I'm good. Because we hadn't talked that much recently over the holidays. When's the next Brian Gracely World Tour happening?
It starts next week. So I've got three starting the next couple of weeks. So I'll be back on the road. So I got to ask you one question before we get into our guest. You've been back at work for 1 week. No sort of in-between answers. Is this going to be a good year for you or a bad year for you based on that first week?
Oh, it'll be a good year. This will definitely be a good year. Absolutely.
Good. Well, listen, we a couple of weeks ago, maybe November, December-ish timeframe, we were talking a little bit about AI pricing. We were talking about there was some quotes that came out, and we were kind of comparing like Microsoft seems to be doing what they usually do, which is per seat pricing for AI. Salesforce is doing kind of per task type of thing, and we were bantering a little bit about like that seems like maybe there's some new things coming along in SaaS pricing. And you and I were talking, and then we kind of told ourselves, look, once again, we're getting out over our ski tips. We don't know enough about this stuff. Let's go find some smart people. And you, in typical Aaron fashion, I said, hey, make some topics up. Come up with some things that you have questions on. You, of course, gave me a list of things that are probably going to be 50-minute shows in and of themselves, and we're going to try and get through those. But very excited today to grab somebody who is living with this stuff on a daily basis, is an expert in this space. So really excited to have James D. Wilton, who's joining us. James, Managing Director of Monetization. James, welcome to the show.
Good to be here, Brian. Aaron, nice to see you.
You are, where are you coming to us from today?
I'm at home in Saratoga Springs, New York.
Oh, excellent. Nice. Excellent. Well, listen, you are, I'm always excited when we get folks that we're just like, we're oftentimes overwhelmed at how much some of our guests have accomplished, some of the things they've done. Give us a little bit of your background, because you not only are doing the things from a managing director perspective, but it feels like you're doing 5 or 6 different things at the same time, all around different aspects of pricing and how to build businesses around the right way to do that. So give us a little bit of your background, and then we'll kind of dive into this interesting topic.
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess I've been a management consultant pretty much since I started my career, which goes back about 20 years now. But I started off in very general management consulting topics, did a lot of go-to-market, did a lot of strategy, did a lot of operations work. And I kind of stumbled across pricing strategy midway through my career, and it was largely by accident, really. I had just had my first kid, Harrison, and the sort of, the 4-day-a-week travel that was kind of fine when I was, it was just me and my wife, and we'd hang out at weekends and all was good. It became less sustainable once we had a kid at home. I think I saw Harrison maybe, mostly at weekends for the first 6-7 months of his life or so, which wasn't what I wanted to do. So I was really looking for something that I could do, not spend as much time traveling, but I really like being a consultant, and I didn't want to give that up. I ended up getting headhunted by this internal consulting team for a big company called Relics that had this internal team, and it focused on pricing strategy. And all of their sub-businesses, they would have this team go and work with them when they needed to change their business model or change their price levels or kind of change these big, broad pricing areas. I hadn't done any pricing in my career up until that point, but as it turned out, it's like a light bulb going off, really. I just found that I loved it. It was way more strategic than I was expecting. There was a lot more room for creativity than I was expecting, so I was kind of hooked quite early. And I stayed with that team for about 4 years, ended up leading that team, and then at that time decided that I wanted to go back into external consulting, but I just wanted to focus on pricing. And that's really what I've done ever since, really. I got deeper and deeper into pricing, and deeper into pricing for SaaS and tech specifically. I ended up at McKinsey in 2018. I was brought in to lead the pricing service line for McKinsey's fast growth tech practice. So it was really McKinsey trying to work with these smaller, scaling companies that they typically wouldn't work with. And that was great. I loved a lot about being in McKinsey. I loved the way we did the work. We got a chance to do some really great work with some really exciting companies when we did. And I really liked the people I was working with. I did find it kind of difficult for a lot of the companies that we were trying to work with to be able to swallow our fees. McKinsey, it's very high value, but it's also quite difficult for startups to pay those fees. So I founded my firm Motivate in 2021, which is really, let's keep doing this work at this level, but let's be a little bit more flexible and try to work with the scaling companies that we want to work with. And that's what I've been doing for the last almost 4 years now. We've grown quite rapidly, and we're really trying to become the go-to for all scaling SaaS tech companies who want to be able to change their pricing model and capture more value that they create.
Yeah, no, outstanding, nice. Outstanding. Well, let's do this. Let's start with something fairly high level, just to give some folks some framing. As folks can see, just over your shoulder, if you're watching the video, and we'll dive into this. You've recently written a book, kind of all encompassing, but part of that is you talk about sort of 5 evolving, somewhat disruptive pricing models that exist in this space, or that people should be aware of and considering. So, can you give us some general framing of how you see pricing working in SaaS, and then maybe how it's starting to evolve, and what's driving that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the funny thing about pricing in general is that, I've been in the space now for about 10, 15 years. And I would say broadly, the challenges and the things that companies struggle with now are very much the same things that they struggled with, 10 to 15 years ago when I started. So there's a lot of the things that companies need to think about and just do well that are kind of evergreen, really, which is, thinking about how to price the value, thinking about ways of pricing in a way that, your customers find acceptable, et cetera, et cetera. But there are a few nuances now going forward, right? I mean, of course, we've talked about AI. I think you guys brought that up as we started off the show here. But AI coming along has really made people start thinking very broadly, because nobody's really figured out how to do this exactly right yet. So I think that's really nice. It's not a disruptive pricing model, say, but it is sort of a disruptive situation that has made people think differently about pricing. And it means we're having to be creative and try to find out what is the best way to do that. So that's certainly one of them. But there are also several other models that I call out, which I think are interesting and that are quite nuanced to be able to do well. So in the book, we talk about freemium as one of those. We talk about tokenization. So, building, rather than just charging in the way that you traditionally would, you create a virtual currency and allow them to spend that virtual currency on your product. And that actually has loads of different benefits. But, some of those can be that it encourages cross-sell across a broader product suite, allows you to trial different areas. It gets quite interesting when you're able to set that up. We also talk about paying for customization as well. I was actually fascinated by Fortnite, a video game that my kids played, and there's so much money that gets put into that game by basically just the players wanting to customize their own avatars, the way that they look and feel. So it doesn't actually help them win the game. It doesn't do any of that. It's just literally, I would just like this. And I think it's mainly a B2C application, but when you really look for them, there are some applications to B2B as well.
Nice. So, James, let me ask you this though too, because I kind of think about this, and we always think about these models and kind of the revenue side, and we think about revenue in a positive way. But there's always the losses side of maybe it's misaligned, maybe it's not the right strategy for the particular audience you're going after, or the target demographics, or there's just somehow some kind of waste built into it, or even like AI comes to mind of hey, most customers only want to pay X dollars a month,
right?
But the cost of the service might be 2x that, 3x that, and so they're still operating at a loss. And a lot of startups tend to do that, to try and gain a lot of market share and try and gain a lot, a customer base. So what is your kind of thoughts on this balance, if you will, of, there's definitely money to be made, but there's also sometimes losses that have to be incurred?
Yeah, no, I think it's a great question, Aaron. And that is something that companies really are struggling a lot with AI as it's coming out. Because it is, I mean, I think this is it's the biggest challenge of AI is that the cost of compute right now is still so high, and I think Sam Altman actually posted recently saying that they brought out this pro version for ChatGPT recently, right? And it was priced at $200 per month for, wasn't unlimited, but it was significantly higher usage. And I actually asked a poll about this on LinkedIn and said, "Hey, what do you guys think about this pricing level?" By and large, everybody was like, "This is way too high. It's ridiculous. Nobody will pay this." And Sam Altman actually posted recently saying, "We're losing money on this version, right? This $200 version, which seems excessive to everybody, is actually losing." So, I mean, I think it's representative of what a lot of people are going through. Yeah. And it's I think right now, right, I'm speaking to a lot of tech companies who are bringing out these different AI products, and most of them have this kind of philosophy that, look, the cost of compute right now is really high, but it is going to drop in the future. So we don't necessarily have to set ourselves up to be super profitable on it right now. We just have to sort of be able to build a pricing model, which we know that end state in a couple of years when we get there is going to be okay. And I think that is a healthy way of looking at it, right? Sort of thinking about what are you willing to accept and just try to get something that makes sense. That said, not everybody's thinking about it that way, actually. I see a lot of companies at the moment fall into the trap of trying to make it super profitable, and they start that thought pushes them into the way of thinking of, let's build a pricing strategy which aligns well to the way that we incur costs. So, if you get more, let's say it's all about compute usage. As the compute usage scales, costs go up, and we're going to charge more on that. So we know that as long as we set the right prices on a per unit basis, we're always good. So the thinking there in terms of ensuring profitability makes total sense. But the issue is that the way that cost scales is not always the way that value scales. And that's kind of pricing 101 in these places, right? You don't want to price based on your cost. You want to price based on the way that the customer sees value. Otherwise, you're going to end up with this real friction when customers are buying it, because they're saying, you are nickel and diming me for all this stuff, but I don't get individual value for this, and therefore I don't want to pay at those levels from that.
Right.
Sorry, Ryan.
No, and it seems like, and we don't want to make this all about AI, but it does seem like for a while, especially with SaaS, they sort of knew what the model looked like. It was, deliver a service that provided a lot of value, and they were essentially sort of the calculus was sort of, I'm going to spend to acquire customers. I know what that spend on a per acquiring customers basis means. And then once I've sort of acquired them and gotten them to some level, that cost sort of goes away, and they could model things out. But the idea of it was, I knew what compute costs look like, and compute had always been going down. And now it's like, oh, now you threw a third variable in there on me, and what 2 years from now, who knows? Does that really work out? Does it not work out?
Exactly.
So I'm curious. There's Aaron and I have been around the sort of the enterprise space for a long time, and the thing you learn in sort of enterprise technology is, on one hand, there's always going to be a ton of technology, and you can figure out how to keep up with it and if it makes sense to you. But the one thing that's always a consistent is, when you ask somebody what's the price of something, the answer is never simple. And I think that sort of blows people away, of like, well, why can't you just tell me what your thing costs? So I'm curious, like, how much do you get into sort of the math and the spreadsheets of building pricing models, and how much of it is kind of like you said, the psychological part of, do they understand what my value is? Do they perceive what value is? How do they think of it? Like, how do you find you sort of balance those two things? Because I have to imagine there's a lot of both of those going into the model.
I think balancing those two things, Brian, is probably the biggest part of building out a pricing strategy that works. And it's difficult, right? Because you can't just say general rule, this is how you balance those two factors. It's really very dependent on the situation that you walk into. So, when we're building out a pricing strategy for any company or product is looking to do it, there are three main sort of things that you have to think about to anchor yourself on where you're going. One of which is the obvious one that everybody thinks about, right? Which is the product, right? How does the product create value? What kind of features does the product have? What are the capabilities that you'd ideally like to monetize, et cetera, et cetera? So starting with that. Then there's the still pretty obvious, but perhaps less obvious side, which is the market factors. So, what do your customers want? What do they expect? How do they want to buy? How much complexity can they tolerate when they're in this purchasing process? And for example, right, if you're selling into an enterprise company, you've probably got A, very technical buyers, or B, procurement buyers, both of whom are actually going to have a lot of patience and ability to be able to go through and make a lot of decisions within there. So you're able to be far more complex in that kind of a situation than you would be if you were selling to consumers, who are really going to make far more of those just kind of, general gut-based decisions and aren't going to analyze everything as tightly in general, sweeping generalization. But then the last piece of it is, and this is the piece that surprisingly everybody forgets about, which is, what are you trying to achieve? What are your objectives for your pricing? Because even if you have like, say we have two companies and they have the same set of customers with the same needs, wants, preferences, et cetera, and they have the same product, if they are trying to achieve different things, then their pricing strategy should be completely different. I mean, imagine if you've got one company who's really thinking, we're early, we want to focus on volume right now, we'll worry about sort of really monetizing the product later, we just want to get a good active customer base. And the other company is thinking, well, we don't really care about how many customers we get as long as we are extremely profitable on every single transaction. The right pricing strategies to drive those two things are going to look completely different. And so and it's true that it's rare that you're going to have like that clear or that polarized the pricing strategy, right? There's usually a set of objectives that you're trying to consider, but there's usually a priority across them. So if you can really think about, this is what's most important to me, this is what's second, maybe that is constrained by this other factor, aligning on all those things is going to help you be able to navigate like what is going to be the trade-offs in these different pricing decisions that might affect the achievement of those different objectives.
Yeah. Well, and so that makes me think of like a follow-up, but that's the initial rollout. Like you said, like two companies, two different strategies, and take that as an example, or take Sam Altman with the recent, $200 a month kind of thing. I also think of like a lot of startups, like they start one way and they kind of pivot and they kind of figure things out. And so there's a lot of changes, a lot of right turns and left turns along the way. Right. And so what are some of kind of the do's and don'ts, if you will, of like, hey, I started here, but now I need to migrate all the current customers into something new. And I'm sure there is some best practices, both good and bad, for those kinds of things. And you might have some horror stories as well. So what's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, moving your customers over from one pricing strategy to another one is always difficult, right? I mean, let's just call that out right at the beginning. It's something it's just inherently difficult. It usually involves a good portion of your customers paying more, for one thing, and customers don't like that in general. So you have to be able to navigate that. But it's really more than that if you're migrating pricing strategy, because not only are you changing the price level, but you're also changing the justification behind it, right? And what is how they should think about why they are priced at the level that they are. And I think it's doubly difficult if you're really making a very large strategic change in the way you're pricing. For example, probably the one that's most prevalent right now is companies moving from very traditional kind of user-based subscription models that we're all very familiar with, moving over to something usage-based or hybrid within that, right? And I've done pricing transformations before where, if you plot a chart where you have one axis, which is what were the customers paying previously, and the y-axis is what are the customers going to be paying now, it's like someone's fired a shotgun at the steering wheel. It's just completely all over the place. So you end up with some customers paying more or less what they were paying earlier, some of which paying massively more, some of which theoretically would be paying less if you were to move them over to the price levels. So, with that, I think firstly, you've got to think about what is your philosophy for moving everybody over. Is it you just want to move everybody over to this new price level, or is it that we're only going to move customers over if the new price levels are higher than previously. We're happy to let people who are paying more on the old one continue to do that. There's obviously some ethical decision making within that, but I find generally companies are quite happy with prices going up. They are less happy with prices going down for obvious reasons.
Yeah.
And then you have to think about, now that we know what our new customers should be paying, it's how do we get them there? And general, I mean, if you go into a situation and you've got a customer who's going to be paying twice as much on this new model, if you just come in there and say, hey, this is your new price, it's twice as much, then more than likely they're going to churn. So, you have to think about what is the strategy for getting them there, which is sometimes not asking them to pay that much. It's truncating it somehow and thinking about how important is that customer to you? How likely are they to accept it based on their level of engagement? And what is the actual dollar level they're paying now versus what they should be paying, et cetera, et cetera. But then also thinking about, is this a one and done? Like we're going to move them over right to this new pricing strategy now? Or do we perhaps get them there over a period of 3 years or so? So you should be paying twice as much as you're paying now based on the value you're getting in this new model. We realize we can't spring that on you now. We're going to walk you up closer to that point over these next three years. That's generally going to get a much better reaction than just doubling the price level.
Yeah.
And I think to your point, starting off this, right, like honestly, we could spend probably an entire hour just talking about this topic. Frankly, it's very nuanced.
Yeah. I'm curious of what the sort of modern pricing experience looks like. And what I mean by that is if I go to any SaaS application service these days, they're always going to have a tab that says pricing. There's going to be some sort of chart that says like free, entry level tier, pro tier, and then like enterprise or something. And the first three tend to have some level of like, well, this is what you get, this is what you don't, sort of the red box, the red check, green check thing. And then the enterprise one is like, if you're outside of this, please call us.
Yes.
Which is, feels very much like, well, that's how enterprise sales works. You're going to have a rep and they're going to have to listen to all your specific. Are you seeing anything evolve to where that last category is becoming, I don't want to necessarily say more transparent because that would imply that like, hey, we're going to tell you the exact price because there's an exact way of doing it. But like, have you seen any sort of modern way of making that last column be more, sort of less driven by an individual salesperson and more some company has figured out like, no, we're just going to have this sort of like, you tell us a few things about yourself, we'll calculate a price for you. Or it is like you said, there still has to be this art of explaining the value of what the company does, why they're maybe charging you a little bit more, why they're a little bit different. Are you seeing anything, especially in the price space, not so much marketing and messaging, but in the pricing space where that's evolving at all?
So I think in general, to your first point, Brian, I mean, in general, there is a shift to pricing more transparently across all segments, right? So it's not necessarily moving all the way over in all those segments. I'd say enterprise pricing is still less transparent than consumer and SMB pricing, but you are starting to see that. And I think it's just the expectation now. We have so many purchases that we can make online where we see the value that it's becoming more the norm, and people are looking for that more and more frequently. And there's also so much product-led growth switching happening now. People are moving away from the sales-led approaches into product-led growth, and transparency just is a real facilitator of making that strategy work. So definitely seeing a general shift towards it. In terms of whether companies are finding better ways to deal with that enterprise pricing piece rather than the just sort of contact us, I would say in general, not really. I think that is probably here to stay, but I think it's, for me at least, from what I see, that contact us is here to stay mainly because it's often what the customer wants as well, rather than what the vendor wants. I mean, the vendor likes that because obviously for enterprises, the reason you'd want to do it not as transparently is because with all those smaller segments, consumers and SMBs and so forth, you're far more interested in getting a real high volume of customers in at like a reasonable price. So the need to sort of really optimize the price level for each of those based on their willingness to pay is just, it's far less. It's really more of a volume game. Whereas when you get to the enterprise segment, there are many fewer customers, and there's going to be massive differences between them. And so being a, you're much more incentivized to really try to nail the exact right price point based on their willingness to pay. And in order to do that, you tend to need more factors than just the sort of maybe the single metric that you're using to scale the pricing for the lower segments. And that kind of a pricing strategy is just very hard to put up on a website and make it super transparent, right? You really need to have it separately. You probably need a salesperson to talk through it, to be able to deal with that and navigate it.
Yeah.
And so that pushes you there. But as I say, I think also the organizations want that as well, because I think when you get to enterprises, you are generally, the size of the deal is so much higher, right? Usually we're talking, hundreds of thousands or even millions in some cases for these transactions. And when you get to that level of spend, I find that customers usually want to be speaking to somebody. They don't want to just kind of make that purchase over the website. They want to talk it through and negotiate and, try to get to a good point. So you've got these kind of two forces working together, really.
Yeah.
Well, and you also have famously like entire procurement departments that all they do is procure and they're measured on, like percentage of discounts they get. And then you have, at least like Brian and I both have been in the hardware vendor space previously. And it's like the price lists are intentionally super inflated, knowing you're going to get a 50% or an 80% or 90% discount. And like the games people play.
Yeah. No, that's right.
In enterprise pricing and sales, it's
and
really
they have to, right? They do. I mean, because I talk about this all the time when we talk about price execution, which is basically, how do you make sure you get the price that you should be getting there? My experience of procurement people, and you basically just said it there, Aaron, right, is that they don't know what you're going to quote them at. But I do know that whatever you quote it at, I'm going to immediately ask for 40, 50, 60% off it as soon as I get it, right? Because it's not so much that that I have a specific budget that I'm trying to get into. Sometimes you have that, but not always. Oftentimes it's just, I just want to get a really good deal and feel like I've got a really good deal. So if you're a vendor and you're selling into that kind of environment, which they often are, the best thing to do is kind of know what is the expected discount that one of these buyers is going to ask of anything, and just make sure you set your list price high enough that after you've discounted it by that amount, you sort of end up in a place where that is actually the amount that you think the product is worth. So you see that very, very frequently.
Yeah.
I want to ask you one last question. Like I said, we probably could have gone on for this for hours and hours, but we appreciate your time. We know you're busy with a lot of things. We started off sort of a little bit talking about AI as it's evolving in some of these SaaS models. I saw a quote the other day from somebody who was basically saying, all of these SaaS companies are trying to add some sort of AI capability, but they don't really understand that that's not a capability that, at least price-wise or cost-wise, looks like some other features you added. Oh, you added emojis or you added some data feature. Like, it's a very expensive thing to add AI, at least for now, right? Since the cost of compute's fairly high. How many conversations are you having with companies where they're kind of at this crossroads where they're like, we think we need to do that to improve our customer experience. We think that's going to help us with stickiness, but that blows up our profitability model. It blows up our timeline to get to profitability. Like, how much is AI in the middle of conversations that you're having with people, and how much is it throwing them off from everything they've sort of known and done for the last couple of years?
Yeah. Now it's coming up all the time at the moment, which you might expect, right? I think there's a lot of the clients that we work with are trying to figure out how to launch AI functionality and do it in a way that makes sense for them economically. And it's a really big challenge. And I think you see this with some of the models that have come out, right? I mean, what always makes me smile, I think, is that you look at Microsoft and they brought out Copilot, and Copilot cost more than the entirety of the Office suite, like next to it, right? To do that upsell on a user license basis.
Right.
And you know why they're doing that? Because they're hedging against the usage that you might get from a user. But you have to kind of remember that, these functionalities are still in most cases considered niche for these places, right? It's not going to be the case that all the users and all the companies that you're selling to are definitely going to see the value in it. So you just kind of include this stuff by default and start bumping up your price, then you're going to have a lot of customer pushback, or churn or lack of adoption because they just don't value what you're charging there. I think you saw this with Canva recently, right? Who tried to bump up the price of one of their versions, and the justification was, we have all this AI functionality in there now. Like, that's only a good justification if everybody who's buying or targeted towards this particular package is going to value that AI functionality. And you heard sort of very clearly from the market that they didn't, and they ended up having to walk it back.
Yeah.
So, what we're really seeing now is you have to solve for the other piece of this as well, is that, if you don't give people exposure to the AI functionalities or capabilities you're doing, that it's always going to be niche. It's never going to get any better. So I think what's happening in a lot of cases now is that these companies who are launching it are putting a kind of usage-gated amount of AI access for their AI capabilities into their lower tiers, so that customers can get in there, they can play around with it, they can understand the value without the cost getting out of control. And then if that customer then decides that the value is there and they want more usage, they can pay for the extra usage on top of it, right? There's a way of getting to monetizing it. And that's generally as a general rule, a good way of balancing the two objectives that you're trying to get to.
Yeah, makes sense. That's good. It's going to be a fascinating thing to watch all that. It feels a little bit, and I'll date myself and so forth. But like, I used to do a lot of work with the telco industry, and when they do capacity planning, or at least the way they used to do capacity planning was, if you were the telephone system, you based everything on Mother's Day, right? That's the number one day that people make phone calls, right. Is call their mom, but obviously, like you can't do that in internet scale, sort of base everything on complete peak. So obviously they'll be better than that, but it'll be very interesting to watch this evolve. James, I want to thank you for your time. I think we're going to wrap up there. People do know that this podcast is we've been very lucky. We've been the number one cloud computing podcast in the industry. A lot of people don't know we're also the number one cloud book recommendation podcast in the industry. You just recently launched a book. Give us a little plug for the book, and maybe what's the best place people can go get it, hopefully so that you make the most, or we can just put the Amazon link so that everybody can get it via Prime. Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you, Brian. Yeah, the book is called Capturing Value, the definitive guide to transforming SaaS pricing and unshackling growth. And it's really, I wrote this book from the perspective of a lot of SaaS leaders that I speak to who have basically been told by the board or by the CEO that, hey, we need a new pricing strategy. We want you to go build it. And these guys, they usually have not got any experience in pricing. They haven't done it before. And then you kind of find them going and scrabbling and looking for information online for how to do this, and there just isn't a lot of good information out there to sort of tell you how to do this. So this book basically walks you through the entire process of defining your objectives and building out your packaging and your price architecture and getting into price levels, talks through the theory or the thinking the mindset that you need to get yourself into to make good decisions, talks about the options that you have, and then also walks you through the steps that you need to go through in order to do it. So hopefully useful resource for anybody who finds themselves in that position when they need to build out a pricing strategy. And the best place to get it, it'll be launched on January the 21st, and it will be on Amazon. So we can give the link so that people can. Fantastic. Well, that will be right about when we publish this show. So that'll be a good beginning of the year present for anybody, for your favorite product manager, your favorite CEO, CFO. Go out and get yourself a copy of that. Well, cool. James, thank you so much for everything today. Like I said, we really just sort of scratched the surface on a lot of topics, but appreciate the time. Aaron, you want to wrap it up and take us home?
Yeah, absolutely. So first of all, everyone, thank you very much for listening. And we certainly look forward to everything in 2025. But if you enjoy the show, please tell a friend. If you can leave a review wherever you get your podcast, please leave us a review as well. That's always helpful. And feedback is always show@thecloudcast.net. James, we certainly appreciate your time this week, and we look forward to talking to everyone next week.
Thank you for listening to The Cloudcast. Please visit thecloudcast.net to find more shows, show notes, videos, and everything social media.